Special occasion on the Ball State Teachers College campus when we, shall we say, dedicate in quotes 2 additional buildings or additions to buildings. These occasions provide us with opportunities to talk about the kinds of things in which we're terrifically interested and also to present to you some of the guests who come to the campus. And also some of the people who are on the campus who have particular parts to play in the use of the buildings. As you know, Mr. Alex Bracken is the president of the State Teachers College Board, and I should like to present him at this time. Mr. Bracken. Linda Gamby is the president of the Tau Kappa Alpha, the Honorary Debate Society, and of course, because she is a senior here on campus, has a great deal of interest in this total program. Linda? And then the heads of the 2 departments that are located in this building, along, of course, with the other departments that we send in occasionally, morning, noon, and night, to take care of some of the jobs that we have to do. But Dr. Thomas Wetmore is the head of the English department. Dr. Wetmore? And Dr. Robert Hargreaves, the head of the music department. And, of course, the other person on the platform I shall introduce later. Well, as I said, we have met for another one of these important occasions, and there are many things that can and should be said. I'll try to keep them brief. The completion of the Music English building with its facilities for the band and the orchestra rehearsal areas as well as for the small music groups, and the special facilities that we call in the communications area for radio, television, speech, theater, dramatics, and journalism, with this instructional auditorium, theater, that joins the 2 together, makes these 2 units extremely useful and helpful in our total program. After the ceremony here this evening and an open house part of the program here in these 2 units, then we shall, of course, move over to the Student Center where we shall I say again, dedicate in quotes the addition to the Student Center also. We're always pleased on these occasions to note the interest that's taken by the honored guests, both those who are on the platform and the members of the board and our other guests here in front, by the friends in the community who come and who participate and show their continued interest and support in our Ball State program, and then, of course, the faculty and the students who come and seem to be very proud of the achievements as we get these buildings completed. It's easy for us to think about buildings in terms of brick and stone and mortar, or even in terms of dollars, things with dollar signs on them. And, of course, we know that this total unit is approximately $1 million out of the taxpayers' program. The other 2 parts of the unit were each one approximately $1 million. And then, of course, we know that the community has already pledged and already contributed a major portion of the $1.25 million for the college and community auditorium, which fits into this total unit and makes a complete structure of it. Well, as I said, unless we are very careful, we think of these units in terms of brick, stone, mortar, and in terms of dollars, when actually these are areas that provide for us opportunities and challenges and help us to meet our responsibilities. Actually, they are buildings, they are classrooms, they are equipment. But more than that, they are integral parts of this total process that we call higher education. They are part of the process and the facilities which makes it possible for us to achieve in what we term making contributions to the generation that is in college in 1960 and the years to come. And the purpose of the college program, of course, is so easily described as stretching the mind. Or as someone has said nowadays, it's doing something about inner space, the space between the ears. These are the types of facilities that make it possible to carry on a program in terms of the challenges that we meet. It's easy to think, for instance, about the approximately 1,400 people that will be graduating from this college this next June. Over 1,000 at the undergraduate level and another 450 at the graduate level. And it's easy to say that of the number of that group who choose to teach, and this will be probably 11 or 1,200 out of the 1,450, that they will next fall be teaching approximately 75,000 boys and girls, young men and young women, in the state of Indiana. so that this building and these facilities that we think of as bricks and mortar immediately have an impact upon what happens to boys and girls and young women in the state. And this is the reason that we come together and indicate our pleasure and our happiness and our gratefulness and our state of appreciation for the privileges that are ours as we open the new buildings that come to us on the campus. And it's in our program of service to people, yes, young people and those in the community and in the state, and to the state of Indiana and to the society of which we're all a part, that we would like to express our appreciation for the privilege to serve in this way. And of course, on an occasion like this, it's always our pleasure to bring to the group in Muncie and at Ball State some individual who brings us a message about higher education or about the state of Indiana or about our own particular buildings and programs. And tonight we're most fortunate in having the Honorable Governor of Indiana, the Honorable Matthew E. Welsh. I'm sure you all know that he's a native of Vincennes and a graduate of high school there. He's also a graduate of the Wharton School of Finance in Philadelphia, where he received his bachelor's degree. He attended Indiana University Law School and was graduated from the University of Chicago School of Law with a Doctor of Jurisprudence degree. He's had more than 20 years of service in state government, serving first as a state representative from Knox County in the Indiana General Assembly in 1941, again in 43, when he was a Democratic caucus chairman and a member of the State Budget Committee. His political career was interrupted by service in World War II. From 1950 to 52, he was with the United States District Attorney for Southern Indiana on an appointment from the former President Truman. He resigned to resume his law practice in Vincennes, and in 1955 was elected to his first four-year term in the state Senate. He was re-elected in 59. Then during 57 and 59 sessions of the legislature, he was the Democratic floor leader in the Senate. In addition to his law practice in Vincennes, Governor Welsh is the director of the Security Bank and Trust Company of Vincennes, Secretary-Treasurer of the Universal Scientific Company, and the M.W. Welsh and Company Incorporated investment firm. And he's the treasurer and trustees of the Vincennes University and a member of the First Christian Church. He also has twin daughters who are sophomores at Indiana University. It's a real pleasure to present to you President Welsh. I'm sorry, Governor Welsh.
Dr. Emens, I'm sure when you started to think about my daughters being at Indiana University, and you automatically said President Wells instead of Governor Welsh. He's been on in the press a good bit lately by virtue of his contemplated retirement, and it's almost natural to think of him when you think of Indiana. Of course, I'm very happy to be a part of this ceremony here tonight. We walked over from the new addition to the student building and contemplated or commented as we walked through the campus upon the tremendous growth of this institution and the place it occupies in higher education here in Indiana, and the marvelous relationship that exists between the school and the community. And by that I do not mean Muncie and Delaware County, but I mean the entire community that this university serves, which is a substantial portion of the state of Indiana. And the thought occurred to me as we walked through the campus that here was one of our major state institutions, representing the expenditure of very substantial sums of state money. And in that light, that it perhaps might be appropriate if I would take 8 or 10 minutes and discuss with you state finances, because those of you who are interested in this university and the continuance of its progress would, in my judgment, be interested in knowing, having a thumbnail sketch of the financial picture of the state, because it does have a very basic concern to all friends of the school. I will not attempt to go into any detail, but merely picture the high spots of the situation. The last session of the General Assembly for the first time in the history of the state, adopted a budget, an operating budget, which contemplated, as a matter of deliberate choice, that the state would expend some substantial sums of money more than it would receive by way of income, by way of anticipated revenue. Some $30-odd million more to be spent in state operations than the revenue was anticipated by way of revenue. Now, this was possible by virtue of the fact that the state had accumulated in its general fund a balance of some $60 million. Those of you who know state government perhaps are aware that we have what amounts to two state bank accounts. We have the State Highway Fund, into which all monies collected from gasoline taxes and motor vehicle license fees are deposited, and this money can be used for nothing but highway construction and maintenance. It's dedicated to that purpose and nothing else, and all other state revenues go into the general fund. And out of this fund are paid all other expenses of state government except highway construction and maintenance. There's one item of our state budget that occupies, consumes approximately 64% of the total expenditures from the general fund budget of the state. And this is the field of education. Now, state support of our local public schools takes, in round rough percentages, and I hope Superintendent Wilson will appreciate that I'm not making a detailed and learned lecture on state support of our public schools, but I'm trying to approximate and rough it off so that for purposes of simplicity. Approximately 45% of our general fund budget goes to state support of our local public schools, and 20% of this money goes to our large state educational institutions. Those of you who are familiar with education, particularly at the lower level, may be familiar with a statistic that has come out of the recent census, which says that in the age bracket between 10 and 17, in the next 5 years, the number of youngsters in this age bracket, according to the recent census, on a national average, will increase in size slightly more than 35%. Indiana will go right along approximately with the national average. So you can see that the prospective load that the state faces by way of state support of its local public school systems is going to increase materially, increase substantially. There has been some, in my judgment, misunderstanding of the condition of state finances because people would look at our cash account on deposit in the banks of the state and say, how in the world could the state of Indiana be facing financial problems when we have more than $140 million in the bank? And this does sound like a lot of money, and it is. But the facts of the matter are that major portions of this are either set up as reserves for pension funds, are set up are committed because of highway construction contracts that are underway, or other construction contracts where contracts have been let but construction has not yet been completed and disbursements all made, and so on. So that actually not nearly all of this money is available for state purposes. And going back to the action of the General Assembly, in adopting this budget, which called for a $30 million operating deficit, the assumption was that revenues of the state were going to continue on a steady upward curve. That in the calendar year 1961, the state would collect on the gross income from the gross income tax somewhat more than it was collected in 1960, and so on. In the middle of this year, in asking for current figures as to actual collections being received by the state, it was found that instead of the state of Indiana from the gross income tax collecting more money than was collected last year, in the first 6 months of 1960, we were actually collecting less. In other words, that the curve on which the budget of our state had been projected so far as income was not accurate. And actually we found that we were some $6 million plus short of anticipated revenue. So that instead of having a $30 million deficit, so far as our operating income as against operating expenditures were concerned, we were now $6 million more short. Starting from a $60 million unappropriated general fund balance, this brings us down in the neighborhood of some $24 million, which certainly is as low as any knowledgeable person concerning state finance would say that it ever should be permitted to fall. Actually, $25 to $30 million is considered to be the desirable cash balance to have available in the general fund for working capital purposes. You see, the total general fund expenditures over a biennial period will exceed $575 million under the current budget. So we have a situation where the state will be spending $30 million more in this biennium, and in addition to that suffered a $6 million reversal in the first 6 months of this calendar year. Now, looking ahead to the future, we have this student load in the already in being, which we can anticipate. Out of this money that is spent by the general fund for support of our public school systems by the state, this sum of money, which actually consumes approximately overall for the purposes of education some 64%, the monies that are sent back to local school corporations actually will represent certainly less than 30% of the total cost of operating the public school at the local level. This again is an average figure. The figure, I think, actually on an average is somewhere between 27 and 28% of the cost of operating the public schools of Indiana is borne by the state. Theoretically, as I understand the formula in its ultimate simplicity, the state undertakes to furnish to the local school corporations enough money approximately to pay the minimum salaries for the teachers that are set by statute. And this represents, this money that the state supplies actually represents between 27 and 28% of the total cost of operating a local school budget. And the balance is picked up by local property taxes. There is great pressure by owners of property at all of the municipal and local levels for the state to assume a much greater portion of the cost of operating our public school system, on the pressure resulting from the fact that owners of property, real and personal, feel that the tax rates have become quite high and that they desire another method of financing the operation of our public schools. If the state of Indiana is to continue to bear 28% of the cost of operating our public schools over the biennium after this one, it will be necessary for the state, if it's going to stand still percentage-wise, to furnish some $45 million additional money in the next biennium. Add $45 million, if we're going to stand still percentage-wise, so far as support of our public school system is concerned by the state, to the $36 million deficit that we already can foresee. We're talking about some $80 million plus additional revenue that the state must supply if it's going to stand still in its support of its educational system percentage-wise. The other institutions of state government likewise have growing pains. Thus we can see that the next session of the General Assembly faces the problem of either providing the necessary additional revenue to finance our system of education here in Indiana, or of forcing a major portion of it upon the local property taxpayers, or failing to see that the money becomes available to maintain the standards of education here in Indiana that we are accustomed to accept and expect as natural. I am sorry that I cannot bear you tidings of great joy on this subject. Those of you who are familiar with legislatures know that this problem is going to be the key question facing the next General Assembly. Those of you who are interested in education, I think, must take particular interest in how the legislature faces up to this problem. And in my judgment, it must face up to this problem, because we cannot afford to let our educational standards in Indiana be jeopardized by irresponsible or thoughtless action on the part of the General Assembly. And I know that all of you will, when during the period after the election and prior to the time the next General Assembly meets, will take it upon yourselves to acquaint your respective senators and representatives with your interest in the problem and discuss with them the various methods that by this time will have been suggested to them of meeting the problem. This whole problem is not one that is being ignored. Many of our agencies are actively exploring the possibilities that are open to resolve this whole problem, and it is being seriously approached. But I think, by and large, the public generally has very little comprehension of the overall problem that the General Assembly is going to face, and the support that the members of the General Assembly must have from the people of the state who are interested in education generally, if we are going to resolve it in the manner that I know all of us sincerely hope can be done. Now, there is certainly no citizen of Indiana, or the rest of the country either for that matter, who begrudges a single dollar spent by the United States government for military defense of freedom and our way of life. And yet, I am equally sure that all of us who have wondered just how much improvement could be made in our country if the billions for defense went instead to education, to conquer disease, provide modern, safe highways, the thousands of other peaceful. We are all, I know, realistic enough to know that this cannot be done. We must remain strong, and in fact, we must become stronger if we are to ensure our freedom and protect the free world. A measure for peace, however, of our strength and our determination to build our own state and the nation as well, despite the heavy drain upon all of us for purposes of defense, is the official opening of this improved facility for what is, I am sure, one of Indiana's finest educational institutions. In the midst of what is probably the most serious threat to the United States since its founding, a better educational system for our children, the training of our young men and women to teach children throughout the state, and to planning and working for a better future, still share our attention and, in fact, occupy what amounts to the center of the stage. But not only must we continue to provide at least as good an education at our public schools as we have in the past, the demands of our increasingly complex and technological society requires that we constantly improve the quality of the educational opportunities we offer. This is and will continue to be an expensive process. As I've mentioned a moment ago, just to mark time in the state's support of our local public schools will require from the state of Indiana an additional $46 million to be appropriated by the next General Assembly. And this will just maintain the state's present 28% of the cost of operating our public schools on the average at the local level. The increase in appropriations for the state universities and colleges will also have to be as substantial in their general rise if we are just barely to stay even, let alone improve our institutions, as this structure is an improvement right here tonight. Now, I am confident that somehow, some way, the people of Indiana and the nation will continue to provide even better educational systems for their children. For this is the only true manner that we can meet the problems of our future. And this will continue no matter how much of our resources we must devote to the defense of our freedom. This is a nation still reaching for its full greatness, a nation with a confidence in its ability and its strength, a nation that is unaware of its promise and its accomplishments. And we are a nation that is proud of its past, but is also confident of its future and willing to do what is necessary, particularly in the field of education, to take the necessary steps to ensure that we continue to move forward. Thank you.